Hello and welcome to the Grow Places podcast, where we explore the virtuous circle of people, growth and place. Brought to you by Grow Places and hosted by our founder, Tom Larsson.
Muyiwa,
hi.
How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
Yeah, great to see you and great to be here at the Barbican.
Thank you for inviting me to the podcast.
No, not at all. It's really a pleasure to have you on, and really fascinated to hear more about what you're up to now, and obviously, how you got to where you are. So, thanks for joining. And why don't you take it from the top?
Yeah. So, like you said, my name is Muyiwa Oki. I'm a chartered architect. I have coming up to 10, 15 years of architecture experience. So pretty young for an architect. I work for a multinational construction consultancy company called Mace, and we do everything really from your housing projects, master plans, all the way to big infrastructure projects like HS2, Hinkley, all that kind of stuff. So it's a multitude of experiences and sort of deep expertise in the technical delivery of projects. Before that, I have quite sort of targeted technical understanding from an architecture point of view. I cut my teeth with experience across your Grimshaw's, Glen House architects, Backer architects, a small architecture practice focusing on water architecture that floats. So I have a broad brush, and I remember taking it as a point when I started my part 1 year out as I'm doing this in a smaller practice just so that I understand details. And I was very purposeful about that so that I can go up to the next stage and next stage and next stage. And when I talk to my mentees and such, I always tell them, try and get the technical understanding so that you can take that to the next level. So that's what I did, and I implore everyone to do that. But for my sins, something that makes me kind of famous in the architecture environment is that I'm the youngest person of color to hold the role of president of the RIBA, a 200-year-old institution. And I did it because I felt, and a cohort of my friends and colleagues felt, that the plight of the young architect wasn't taken into consideration. And I wanted to ensure that the profession wrestled with and acknowledged the fact that the asymmetry between employer and employee, which was my generation, wasn't taken into account. And you can see that it manifested itself in the imbalance in pay when it comes to overtime pay, to be particular. Overtime was required, but overtime pay wasn't required or compensated. And that's what I want to talk about. So that was one of the through line in my campaign for presidency that I won. And I had the seat for 2 years. And I made an incremental change, but a change nonetheless to direct the institution to look at the future.
Yeah, no, fascinating. And so, I'd love to dive into different components, obviously the work with the RIBA and what you're doing now. But just generally for you, as an individual, like how do you have a sense of how you've kind of got to where you are? Why you've done that? It's an amazing journey you've gone on, but it's not a typical journey. What's driving you to do that?
Well, I think it's a sense of unfairness and inequality. As you probably know, if you read my Wikipedia, one of the things surprising things that comes out of the woodworks when you do something out of the ordinary is that some people write Wikipedia pages about you. So I have a Wikipedia, but I don't know who wrote it. Anyway, and the Wikipedia shares that I'm of Nigerian descent. And in Nigeria, because I grew up partly in Nigeria, the sense that inequality is very stark. You see it if you walk out the door. I'm fortunate enough, my parents did well enough to insulate us a little bit from that inequality. So what I live with it, and here in the UK, it's not as apparent, but it's there, and it's very in the architecture industry. There is, I don't know if it's changed dramatically, but there is that sense of, well, you have to go through the hard yards that I did in my previous generation, and I thought that's in this day and age in 21st century, that shouldn't be the case. So that's the sense. The sense of, like, of fairness that drives me.
Yeah, no, well, I completely agree, and I think architecture it's always, if you look back over history, it's often been sort of a more elite profession in inverted commas. And there was a period where, probably 60s period, where that wasn't necessarily the case post-war. But definitely I think that is increased that sense of a narrowing of the pool of people who are involved in it, and you're probably better placed than most to sort of talk about why you think that is. And so it'd be good to get your thoughts. Obviously, from us as a developer, as a commissioner of architecture, of architects and other consultancies, we want as good a representation of the places and the neighbourhoods where we're working to come through in our team. So we look to work with local architects, or have intentionally have teams selected for their technical merit and their reputation, but also to try to create a diversity of voices within project teams. And if that isn't coming through from architectural profession and other professions, that we all lose something, I think, from that. So
sure. Yeah, there's a thing that I say, and I said when I was in office, was, if we want the societies and the communities that we build for, we need to ensure that there's a plurality of people who can have a say in design, and that's where the architect comes in. So that's why the whole idea of, like, campaigning for level 7 apprenticeships was we as the royal we with the RIBA really focused on it, because if we exclude folks who can't go to university with the 7 years degrees that we have, we are only going to get the type of people who can afford to do so. I actually don't know where that campaign is at the moment, but when I left the seat of the presidency, we were really focusing on how we can implore the government to rethink the level 7 apprenticeship attitude.
Yeah, and also you mentioned pay earlier. It's all connected, isn't it? Because there's partly getting a place at university, being able to fund the fees, the length of the course, but then there's the economic prospects when you come out, and frankly none of those are very compelling, really, are they, for architecture,
a young person who wants to be an architect. So that needs to change. And I know it's gonna take multi-stakeholders. The government needs to look at their education program, especially for apprentices. If architects need to have a postgraduate to become a registered architect, most postgrads are over 21. That means your apprenticeship scheme can't disqualify anyone who's over 21. So that we need to have a joined up thinking about it.
And so talk me through. I'm fascinated to understand. You've mentioned sort of the deeper reason why you wanted to put yourself forward initially for the presidency, and then the process of doing that, being selected, and then those 2 years. What was that like, and how maybe are you the same person now? Do you have a different outlook, or is it sharper? How do you see all of that for yourself?
It's definitely sharper. When we were talking off camera, I did mention that there was a sense of like naivete going into it, especially because I was very laser focused on the issue that I really cared about, and I forgot about the other things that you got to do as president. For example, the judging you have to do for the Royal Gold Medal, and it just didn't occur to me in the whole campaign process at all. But those were the nice things. So the nice sort of soft power things, choosing who gets to be Royal Gold Medal, choosing who gets to be the Sterling Prize recipient. But those were, I say, drivers of like what was important to me, because you're chair of all these committees and such. And I remember in the panel choosing, or we having a short list of projects for the Sterling Prize, and we really went for the last one was the Elizabeth line, and it was a kind of like sort of off-kilter choice because it wasn't a pure building, but if you think about it architecturally, it was an architecture-led project by an architecture company. So it's a good story to tell that architects don't just live in the sort of like housing realm. We do everything to do with community and infrastructure, the fabric that stitches the community together, which the transport does as well. So it was also a fantastic conversation, and I think those were the things that I really enjoyed when in office. And I think now that I am out of it, I get a sense that we just need to continue having this conversation about good design, public space, community in the open, so that more people can talk about it.
Yeah, totally. And it couldn't be more apt. We're sat in the public spaces here at the Barbican. Maybe people listening can hear there's music playing in the background over your shoulder. There's a couple practicing their dance routine.
Yeah.
Public space is super important, isn't it? And just that sense that the city is for people.
Yeah.
You've mentioned it professionally, but also, that's a big sort of responsibility as architects that the profession has, and not by extension developers and everyone working in cities and in the built environment. And just to have that representation, I think, is critical. And as you say, it must have also been like a real like privilege and opportunity to be within those circles and to do that. And so because how did you feel like stepping into the institution then, so to speak? And because it is,
it was slightly daunting, I must say. I remember there was one time that I had to deal with. I think it was the first week that I had to deal with an issue. It was the the RAC concrete issue.
Yeah.
If you remember, the reinforced auto-aerated concrete.
Yeah.
Back in the 60s and 70s, and that came in the first week of my term in office, and they needed a spokesperson for the architecture industry or the design industry and in buildings, and they called on the RIBA, and the representative was me, so I had to go on Channel 4 and other news bulletins to talk about what the issues are, and I only got briefed a couple of days before that. So that was daunting, but also I really enjoyed that. Really, now that one thing that I've taken from it is this sort of the ability to communicate, and to communicate in primary colors. That's what I call primary colors. So no big words, talk in plain English. And I feel like that's now it's a core skill that everyone needs to do, especially with AI and such.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And for us, when we're talking about bringing forward development, regeneration in places like that element of communication through, the consultation process, if you want to call it that, engaging with local people, with local businesses. How do you turn really quite complicated things and projects and processes into things which are understandable and use everyday language? Mm-hmm. And I think the more that we can try to do that as an industry, and as people generally, to share ideas, to find kind of common ground and not exclude people through a language that we use, no acronyms and other things like that. I think that's really super important for building trust, building engagement, connections between people and people having a sense that the places that we're developing are for them.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you've that element of building trust within what you've done. Like that must have been important for you, because any position of leadership, particularly like that, it's sort of a political aspect as well, isn't it? It's like how do you lead? How do you bring people along that journey with you?
So the one thing that I don't know if anyone advised me on that, but I knew inherently was having that sort of skin to skin contact with people, and one of the things that I implemented for the president's office was a calendar for touching base with all the different regions. So the RIBA splits the regional map into 12, I think. Northeast, Northwest, Midlands, and international. So I had the calendar to say that I need to go to all of those regions. I didn't go to all of them in the end, but I need to at least touch base with a school of architecture and an office of RIBA chartered office in at least as more regions as I could. And if I could tie it in with the activity that we're already going to do, for example, UK Reef we're talking about, I'm in Leeds, so I'll go to UK Reef, but also go and see a university, a school of architecture, and a couple of architecture practices, just so that I think most people just want to know that they are being heard. And I don't want to minimize what I did there, but not that much really. Yeah. But the one key thing was that the HQ came to us, came to our practice, came to our school of architecture, and really talked to us and understood what we were doing. And it was actually helpful for me because on a board level, on a council level, I could go back, I could collect all those information and feed it back on the board level and say, look, this in Leeds, they said XYZ, can we look into it? So it helped me in my communications back so that I have things to offer at a board meeting and such. But also I felt like it meant quite a lot to people in Newcastle, say, oh wow, the president of the RIBA came to us and talked to us about what we need, and he's taking it back. We're happy, we feel considered.
Yeah, no, that's great, isn't it? And as you say, it's meeting people where they are, taking the effort, the time to go and see people.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, whether it's getting out of your office or getting out of your city or whatever it is, and just showing up really and being there. And I think that, as you say, there's a huge amount that people take from that. And how did you think? Because the RIBA is obviously it's a UK regulatory body, but it's got a global kind of reach to it, hasn't it, as well? And culturally, it's synonymous with kind of architecture, design, standards, good quality. And so, how did you have much involvement internationally in terms of that, and how do you think about that personally as well?
The RIBA, it's funny, the RIBA in terms of reputationally, internationally is perceived like top tier, best in class. It's the oldest architecture institution in the world. Not the biggest, because the AIA, the Americans do it better, they're bigger. But when I had the opportunity and the luxury of going and representing the RIBA at the Venice Biennale, all the other international architecture and design conferences, and especially in Asia, they love the RIBA. They can't speak highly of the RIBA. And I think it's because the standards that we set. So the plan of work, they use it in Malaysia, Singapore, China even. The contracts, it's the sort of the gold standard, as it were, for architectural projects, especially for smaller projects. So it's, on the international sense, it's looked at fantastically. and I managed to open up a European branch, so cast a wider net in Europe, and currently there's talks about having an Africa branch as well. But in the UK, it's kind of the reverse, where because we're closer home, the UK chartership scene looks at that RIBA as just a London institution, and perhaps that's why I decided is innately just to go out and have touch points with the different regions in the UK, just to assuage that feeling, whether it's justified or not, that the RIBA is London only.
Where do you think that comes from then, that sense?
The sense is just because, the headquarters here is in London, most of the events are in London, the library is in London, and then there was the House of Architecture project, which is the project that my predecessor kickstarted, and my session of council pushed it forward to refurbish the headquarters and find a lasting home for the architecture collections that has over 4 million pieces of drawings, artifacts, periodicals, and all that kind of stuff. So it was a once in a generation thing that needed to be done, but it was all happening in London. So therefore, everyone again added fuel to the fire that everything is in London. It's kind of like that scene in what's it called? What does Rome ever do for us?
Yeah.
In Monty Python, right? What does Rome ever do for us?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like that.
Yeah. And for you personally, then, do you have a sense of, having gone through that experience, why is architecture important? Why are architects important? Fundamentally, and then how do you see that empowering you personally into the work you do at Mace now and sort of moving forwards?
Well, architecture is super important because it's the glue that binds the project together. I see it very, very starkly in the work that I do here at Mace, where, for example, there was a bid that we were working on, and it's a it's a large site, international, and there was this conversation about just answering the questions in the and then when someone like me and the team were involved, we started to liaise with the engineers and talk about, okay, so what does that look like for the end user? And it's very easy for the consultancy team across the project lifecycle to just think about their bit, their square, or the bit of the project. And there isn't that sort of, there's only one person or one consultant that looks at the thread that ties it all together and what the output looks like. And that's what the architect does. And so therefore, I think it's important for architects to share that value creation. It's that sort of cultural value that we add to a project that makes it usable, that makes it user-friendly, that makes it last, like the Barbican for 50, 60 years.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And I think also because, I think, it's great to have you on and you get your perspectives. And I think not only from the work you've done at the RIBA, but the fact that you're an architect working for a contractor or a consultancy contractor, all of that is atypical from the traditional architects as in their role is then, as we talked about, from maybe a certain background and doing a certain type of practice that talks to a certain type of people and works in a certain type of way. And I think that's so refreshing that. So, and I've done a lot of work with Mace over the years, and I know that they're incredible at what they do, both the consultancy side and the contractor side, but they are fully integrated. You're not there with architecture on a sort of upper level pedestal above everything else. You're probably working out what's right for the project, what's most efficient, what's best use of materials, what's technically deliverable. And so that perspective on an architect, how do you see in practice now, as opposed to in the RIBA type role. Like, how do you see that and the value that you bring day to day to Mace and to those projects?
Well, I think, again, when I talk to my mentees and such, I do believe a core competency is the technical understanding, and I think it's now then to like translate that technical understanding into something that is usable and like communicating in the like primary colors, like I say. And one of the reasons why I'm at a company like Mace is because I wanted to really strengthen my technical capacity and technical understanding, sort of the technical deliverability of things. And that's where I think more architects could benefit from. And also the education system needs to gear itself towards that. Because I remember reading this an article, I think it was on the RIBA journal or AJ or something, about like how the architecture education system is like a baker or a chef that doesn't learn how to bake a bread or cook a dish. You're just thinking about it in theory. I think that sort of grounding on a technical level, even if it's cursory, needs to be. I would say in my review or feedback to education establishments, we need to put in the statutory elements to it. So, like, I remember not having to really consider building regulations at university because you knew that, well, that it didn't really matter. And I think that needs to be tested in a more rigorous way, so that by the time you get out of university, there's a sense that there's a statutory compliance to the fantastical things that I'm designing and talking about theoretically at uni.
Yeah, very well said. Because, as a client, and I obviously started in architecture, so I have seen both sides. But as a client, the value that we see from architects, yes, it is in the aesthetic and bringing ideas and unlocking value in terms of getting massing and unlocking complex problems. But it's really actually in that professional responsibility to ensure that the building is delivered well, and that it is safe, that it is put together well, that it's going to last, that you're coordinated with all your other consultancies. And I think that notion of the historic master builder, however you want to call it, yes, architects are not that now, and that's probably fine, but some element of that has definitely been lost over the years, and a focus more on the aesthetic or on the theoretical or on the architectural narrative for that, and I think so. I don't think that's as valuable to clients. I don't think it's as valuable to architectural practices, and it ties to fees. It ties then to how are you preparing people to come into the working world. And Kia, Regan Alexander, and I had a conversation about this on the podcast. We were sort of saying, in this world that's transforming with AI and other things, really the architect needs to hold on to, and if not regain some of that technical competence and that responsibility, and really own that in a positive sense.
You talked about safety, and again, one thing that the RIBA, that I led within the RIBA, was the principal designer role with BSA, and again, it's still a little bit of wild west because anyone can be a principal designer. But it was imperative that the RIBA led for the architects to take on that role, because it is a statutory requirement now. It's going to be for high-risk buildings in particular. So therefore, it like you say, kind of takes or gives the architects that ability to take control over the various issues across the project lifecycle, when it comes to risk and apportioning risk and understanding and dealing with risk when it comes to the entire project, not just the facade. Yeah,
no, I completely agree, and I think that's going to prepare those students, as you said, like for working life as well, and to be valuable to practice from day one. I know that the counter arguments for that within architecture is that, definitely during part one, you don't want to stifle people's creativity, but equally there has to be that reality of like the actual day job of what you're doing. and where you add value and
Yeah.
to businesses and practice.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so maybe then, like, looking forwards, then maybe that's a nice segue to that. Like, how do you see, you know, you're still a young man, you know, you've done an amazing amount in your career so far, but how do you see that kind of platform, you know, moving forwards for you? And how do you think about the future?
Well, I haven't thought too much about the future, funnily enough, because like I said, I'm getting married in not so long. So right now I'm just sort of like hunkering down and like doing the day job. But I do really want to focus, like hone my skills a little bit more about on the delivery side. So like, you know, in my 10, coming up to 15 years in practice, I've only delivered like one building from start to finish. I know it's not like a badge of honor or anything, but I would want to like have a couple of other significant projects under my belt. I would also want to start or have some sort of touch points with Sub-Saharan Africa when it comes to design and development, especially because they are rapidly developing. So it'd be great to have a outreach there and build something and try to get the sort of policy and trust back into like the built environment over there. So that's something, but then that's super far in the future, and I don't have as yet a way in which that will be delivered. But that's the idea.
Yeah. And well, you mentioned to me off mic that planning a Nigerian wedding is quite a feat in terms of people and things like that.
Exactly, and it's international, so coordinating between here and there and getting everyone together, it's a feast of its own. So post October, there'll be after the wedding, honeymoon, and whatnot, there'll be more deep thought about where to go next.
Yeah. Well, that's a good way to frame it and to think about things. And so how do you think about how do we make architecture design? We talked about technically, but I don't know whether through the process you've thought about how buildings, places really feel authentic or grounded or in that local community, whatever that may be. We've talked about the fact that obviously we need more diversity in the people in design positions or in the client teams and that sensibility, but you know, how do we move the vernacular on, however you want to talk about it, within places that they feel of that place?
Well, I think one thing, I've been talking about it, and I talked about it in office on a sort of high level, policy sort of level, about good places. How do you design, I think it was how do you quantify good design or something like that, or good places. And I fear a little bit that there's a hyper financialization of real estate and the built environment, and because quite a lot of people see that or believe that real estate is purely an asset to get returns on, and that for me that's a little bit of a problem, because if you want to make quite a lot like return on investment purely, I don't think places and buildings are the quickest way to do that.
Yeah, great.
First and foremost. So that's what I think an issue. We need to think about places, buildings as more than just financial assets. So how to do that is still, I'm open to ideas on it, but I just think part of that conversation needs to be put to the fore. But the second thing I do believe then is to have the space to make people inhabit it as they wish. And an example of that, for example, is King's Cross. I always think about King's Cross, Granary Square, the steps and the water fountain area, and that is just it's small enough to be, because has edges to it, but it's open enough for people to like, I just want to sit here and not buy coffee and just listen to my music and do my thing. And that, I think that's what is kind of needed, a space big enough for people to just like use willy-nilly.
Yeah.
Not structured, unstructured space. People will put the structures around it.
Yeah.
If it's, I think that's in terms of like successful spaces, people put their structures within it, and you just put the canvas.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's a good place to end, because maybe we go and watch these dancers who are just making this space their own,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
occupying it in a really relaxed way. And
Yeah.
it's been really like great to have this conversation with you,
thank you,
and to get a bit deeper into your experiences and everything.
Yeah,
And
it was wonderful.
thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's good to me. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Grow Places podcast. For more information, visit growplaces.com and follow us at We Grow Places across all social channels. See you next time.